In this video, I'll introduce power. What is power? What is power for? What are sources of power? Let's start with a quote from a British philosopher, logician, and mathematician, Bertrand Russell. The fundamental concept in social science is power, in the same sense in which energy is the fundamental concept in physics. First, what is power? Power can be defined as asymmetrical control over resources by allocating or withholding them. Power is a fundamental aspect of social life among not only humans but also social animals. It is a structural property of social relationships. In the social group of monkeys, an alpha male, for example, monkey number 1, gets all the matings. Another male, for example, monkey number 2, is unhappy with the alpha getting all the matings. Since monkey number 2 refuses to consent to giving power to monkey number 1, the two monkeys fight to establish power and social dominance. If monkey number 1 loses the fight, he huddles into a ball, rocks, and behaves depressed as his testicles turn from blue to a dusty gray. Those behavioral changes are signals of involuntary yielding. By signaling that he is not a threat, the loser escapes attacks by the new dominant. In human organizations, power dynamics are more sophisticated. Power is usually endowed to those who are at the high levels of management in organization. A school board has the power to decide which candidate to be hired as a superintendent to take the helm of a school district. A superintendent has the power to override a decision made by a curriculum committee. A school principal holds more power than a janitor when the principal's teacher evaluation influences teachers' income. Those in the upper echelons have more power than the ones at the bottom of organizational hierarchy. In addition to a structural property in organizational hierarchy, power can also be a psychological property or a state of mind, a subjective feeling of power. You don't need to have a powerful title. Thoughts and feelings that are associated with having power can activate a power mindset. You have a power mindset after reading a series of words related to power or recalling an experience in which you feel powerful. In Game of Thrones, Varys, who is a skillful manipulator, said to Tyrion Lannister, "Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick, a shadow on the wall, and a very small man can cast a very large shadow." In our daily life, when a group of friends gather together, we may see someone tend to direct others to do certain tasks, when no rule or structure is in place to give power of assigning tasks to a given individual. A person's subjective feeling of power sometimes can be too overwhelming to suffocate others. Have you ever noticed that someone's presence in a social setting can suck the oxygen out of the room? Power can be used in many ways, some positive, some negative. Mention the word power and people have different reactions to it. For some, power conjures up negative images, such as Joffrey Baratheon and Peter Baelish in Game of Thrones. Others think of positive leaders such as Ned Stark in Game of Thrones, or a boss whom they truly respect. This range of reactions makes the point that power in and of itself is neither good or bad. Power is simply the ability one person has to influence another individual, group, or organizations. It is also possible for people to use their power to make others feel more powerful and more influential. What is power for? Leadership can be conceptualized as a process of influencing the behavior of others To do so, leaders must be able to influence others in a way that they want to achieve the shared goal rather than being forced to do things against their will. Power is the means that can be used to achieve the end. Power enables people to exert control of others, influencing their thoughts, feelings, mind, and behavior. Therefore, power is essential to leadership. Indeed, leadership can be considered as the exercise of power. And power is the reason why subordinates comply with their supervisor's directives, even when those directives are unethical and undermine organizational goals. Throughout human history, power without checks and balances is dangerous. But it is equally dangerous, if not more, if people lack power or feel powerless. In organizations, the lack of power or a feeling of powerlessness undermines organizational productivity, employee morale, and leadership effectiveness. It is important to understand people's reactions when power is being used by others toward them. For example, when your supervisor uses his or her power to get you to do something nefarious, you may respond with compliance because you need to stay on the good side of your supervisor and keep your job. You may respond by being calculating. What can I get in return for following the supervisor? You may also respond by saying no at the risk of being retaliated. You may also respond by withdrawing and keep your communications with your supervisor at a bare minimum in order to distance yourself. Clearly, leaders need to understand how and when power can be used to achieve the response they want from their direct subordinates, their colleagues, their own supervisors, and others in the organization. There are many theories that explain power. Here, I introduce one of the longest standing theories, 5 sources of social power. The history of 5 sources of social power can be traced back to 1959. The 5 sources of social power include referent, expert, legitimate, reward, and coercive. The first 2 sources, referent and expert power, are personal sources of power. The rest of the 3 sources are positional sources of power. Legitimate, reward, and coercive power are granted by the organization. For example, Joe is promoted to be a director because he is the son of the organization president. Joe has no expertise in the department, and most people in the department do not respect him. But Joe still has power to influence people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Why? Because the position of department director grants him power to allocate resources, assign workload, evaluate people's job performance, and decide whom to be promoted or demoted. Let's define each of the 5 sources of social power. Referent power is a personal source of power. It derives from admiration, respect, and identification one person feels for another. You can develop a reputation for integrity, being attractive physically or mentally, or exhibit charisma that makes others want to follow you voluntarily. If we compare the legislative achievement, Lyndon Johnson undoubtedly outperformed John Kennedy. President Kennedy lacked superior legislative skills and focus that Lyndon Johnson brought to the central issue of the time, civil rights. President Johnson mastered the skills of drafting bills and amendments, the intricacies of parliamentary procedure, and a finely developed sense of timing, knowing when to wait, when to introduce bills to the floor, when to delay the process, and when to push his cabinet officers to lean on wavering legislators. Johnson's administration passed an unprecedented amount of legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Johnson's administration also extended the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt, including aid to education, Head Start, Medicare, and Medicaid. Those programs are still significant today. By contrast, President Kennedy's legislative agenda was mostly stalled. Despite all of President Johnson's influence on people's daily life, most people admire President Kennedy far more than President Johnson. Many reasons can explain that. One of them is that Kennedy had more charm and charisma than Johnson did. President Kennedy's charisma actually continued to rise after his tragic death at 46 years old. A leader's charisma can dramatically increase or decrease after his or her death. We'll talk more about charisma in charismatic leadership in a different video. Here, President Kennedy's charisma drew people in and won people's admiration and respect. And this referent power allowed President Kennedy to have significant influence on his cabinet and on the public. Expert power is another personal source of power. Expert power, as the name suggests, derives from a person's abilities, skills, and talents. Abraham Lincoln was a talented storyteller and had exceptional skills of writing and communication. He captured audiences with accessible, everyday images that were easy to remember and repeat far and wide. In Lincoln's famous House Divided speech, he said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." You gain your expert power by education and training. You exhibit greater expertise than others over time, so people come to recognize your expertise through their interaction with you. You have to earn expert power. You can't just self-claim it by saying, "I am an award-winning expert on XYZ," or "I have a PhD of XYZ. So you all need to listen to me. Do whatever I say whenever I say it. Give it a try and see if it works." Personally, if some scientists come out and say, "You should trust me because I represent science," I raise my eyebrows and probably roll my eyes internally. Any scientist is one of many scientists who work on science by using scientific methods to get close to truth. Science is a process. No single scientist can represent science. Do not abuse your hard-earned expert power. What are the consequences of abusing expert power? Because the expert power is earned over time, you can earn it, you can also lose it. If you offer expert advice and prove to be wrong, you may lose some or all of your expert power. In my earlier video, I analyzed the problematic decision-making process of the World Health Organization deciding when to tell the public that the COVID virus was airborne. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, on March 28, 2020, the World Health Organization explicitly stated that the virus was not airborne, even though a growing number of reports suggested that the virus could be airborne. The World Health Organization even posted a tweet on its Twitter. "Fact, COVID-19 is not airborne. The coronavirus is mainly transmitted through droplets generated when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or speaks." In the tweet, there was an incorrect red stamp on the statement that COVID-19 is confirmed as airborne. And it took nearly 2 years for the World Health Organization to clearly state that the virus was airborne. What are the consequences of the World Health Organization's expert advice of the COVID virus was not airborne? Governments around the world spent much of the pandemic focusing on hand washing and surface cleaning instead of ventilation and indoor masking. Once you lose your expert power, it's very difficult to win it back. Legitimate power is a positional source of power. Instead of earning it, legitimate power is granted to you, usually through your hierarchical position in an organization. For example, you can vote on an important issue in your organization because of your position, not necessarily your charm or your expertise. Since legitimate power is grounded in the hierarchy of an organization, it will grow as a person moves up the organizational hierarchy. Every promotion brings you more legitimate power. If you are demoted, your legitimate power will decrease. Here are my two questions for you all. By the nature of hierarchy and authority, power is distributed unevenly in organization. Should we dismantle organizational hierarchy? Should we distribute power evenly in organizations? What do you think? Reward power is another positional source of power. It derives from the ability you have to reward others for desired behaviors. For example, if you are granted control over the pay and the performance evaluation of others, your subordinates will be inclined to do whatever you want in order to receive those rewards. The rewards can be monetary, such as salary raise or bonus. The rewards can also be non-monetary, such as praise of good work in public and more autonomy at work. In fact, people are much less motivated when they do things for extrinsic reasons, such as money, than intrinsic reasons, such as doing things because they are meaningful to themselves and others. To motivate others, it is important to show people how meaningful their work is. The key is that you reward people with something they value. Otherwise, your rewards, either monetary or non-monetary, won't influence people's behavior or even demotivating people. Here is an example. Your supervisor asked for your feedback and suggestions of something. You offered your suggestions dutifully. Then your supervisor says, "What about you taking care of it?" Imagine you've already overwhelmed by your current job responsibilities. The reward you want is more time and less distraction to handle what's on your plate. But now your supervisor asks you to do part of her job. The last thing you want is to add one more thing to your to-do list. By the way, your job and your supervisor's job are evaluated based on completely different criteria. What would you do the next time your supervisor asks for your suggestions? In this case, the more suggestions you offer, the more work you ask for yourself. Leaders need to be aware that rewards have limits. If we are encouraged to do something only because we think we'll be rewarded for doing so, rather than because we inherently want to, then ultimately we may not want to do it at all, especially once the rewards are removed. If you reward people for demonstrating desirable behavior, you need to be careful about what behavior you want to promote. For example, you preside a meeting to make a group decision. For the group to make a high-quality decision, you should make sure that each group member has equal speaking time and equal speaking turn. If you allow a couple of members to dominate the group discussion by speaking more frequently and speaking longer than others, you are actually rewarding those dominant voices by giving them more attention and allocating more time for them. That reward would be unfair to other group members, discouraging them from sharing information that may be important for quality decision. Here is another example. A group of 5 people delivered exceptional performance collectively. There is one problem. One of the group members did not contribute much. He was just riding along. He was a free rider on other group members' efforts. If you reward the entire group, including the free rider, what will those 4 contributing members do? They'll withhold their efforts in group projects in the future. Why? Because they don't want to be taken advantage of. This effect is called the sucker effect. Nobody wants to be taken advantage of. Nobody wants to be a sucker. Coercive power is another position-related source of power. It is the opposite of reward power. Instead of using reward to influence people's behavior, coercive power derives from your ability to punish others for not doing what you want done. If you want employees to be punctual, you can withhold promotion or discretionary time off in order to punish those who are chronically late at work. This approach of gaining power is typically traced back to the writings of Niccolò Machiavelli, the 15th century Italian statesman, writer, and political philosopher. In particular, it is associated with his book, The Prince, an analysis of the deeds of great men, which was presented in the form of an instruction book for the would-be leaders, Prince. The book included recommendations of the following form. It is far better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. One can make this generalization about men. They are ungrateful, fickle, liars, and deceivers. They shun danger and are greedy for profit. While you treat them well, they are yours. They would shed their blood for you, risk their property, their lives, their sons, so long as danger is remote. But you are in danger, they turn away. For love is secured by a bond of gratitude, which men, wretched creatures that they are, break when it is their advantage to do so. But fear is strengthened by a dread of punishment, which is always effective. In the book, Machiavelli argued that power is, in its essence, about force, fraud, ruthlessness, and strategic violence. Machiavelli wrote the book during a time of extreme violence. Murder was about 100 times more common than it is today. Rape was acceptable. Torture was a public spectacle, often accompanied by song and poetry. Abuses of power could largely go unchecked. Few people could read. There was no journalism to hold the powerful accountable. There was little notion of universal individual rights. Adolf Hitler, according to his own word, kept the book Prince by his bedside, where it served as a constant source of inspiration. If you look around, coercive force of power is prevalent. Co-workers sacrifice colleagues to advance their own careers. Supervisors treat subordinates as expendable to deliver impressive performance. Businessmen initiate hostile takeovers, and bullies torment others on school playground and at workplaces. Coercive power is often most useful in stopping an undesired behavior. You need to be cautious about using coercive power and using it unless it is absolutely necessary, because it can lead to unintended consequences, such as employees' resentment. Recall all the mandates we had during the COVID-19 pandemic. Using coercive power, governments at the federal, state, and local levels issued mandates to punish those who refuse to wear masks or get COVID vaccinations. Coercive power is mostly used to stop an undesired behavior. Once the undesired behavior is stopped, it may be necessary to use reward power to promote desired behaviors. Otherwise, people are not motivated to continue to demonstrate the desired behaviors. This is what we call impose discipline with carrots and sticks. You won't be an effective leader if you use coercive power constantly and only issue mandates to get things done. A 2018 study published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences reported that infants as young as 21 months old can distinguish between respect-based power asserted by a leader and fear-based power asserted by bullies. Researchers analyzed infants' eye-gazing behavior. which was a standard approach for measuring expectations in children too young to explain their thinking to adults. Infants stare longer at events that contradict their expectations. How long infants stared was something that can be observed and measured. Previous study reported that infants stared longer at scenarios where larger characters deferred to smaller ones. Infants also stared longer at scenarios where a character who normally wins a confrontation with another suddenly loses. In this study, the researchers developed a series of animations showing cartoon characters interacting with an individual portrayed as a leader, a bully, or a likable person with no evident power. The findings suggest that a 2-year-old already understands that with leaders, we have to obey them even when they're not around, but with bullies, we only need to obey them when they are around. In addition to the above 5 sources of power, there is another source that was debated. It is information power. Some have combined information power with expert power. Information power derives from you providing information so important and compelling that it can lead others to change their behaviors. You can gain information power by having access to or creating the information that is critical to others. You can divide your team into different subgroups and discourage those subteams from communicating with one another. They report only to you, so you have access to information that may be important for Group A to complete their work. You can wield information power by choosing to share or withhold that information. Secretaries and assistants have a lot of information power because they have access to a large amount of information. You can also use the construct of information power to explain transparency in organizations or governments. Being transparent cultivates trust because you think there is nothing you want to hide. But why do some people resist transparency? Is it possible that the more information they have and the less you know, the more information power they have over you if they want to influence your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors? In this video, I introduce the definition of social power and the sources of social power. Power, by its very nature, is social. Power is not simply something that leaders have or don't have as individuals. It is also something that they have by virtue of other people. You gain power only if others consent to it. A superintendent gains power over a school board when the board turns a blind eye to the superintendent's unethical behavior. When leaders refuse to exercise its power to punish those who prioritize self-interest over group interest, the leaders implicitly give power to self-serving individuals. When you cave in to bullies in group meetings, you cede your power to them. Power is a central construct in leadership because power influences people's thoughts and behavior in interpersonal and organizational contexts. A leader can have power over others by virtue of the resources under his or her control. For example, the ability to reward and punish. But this needs to be differentiated from the power that accrues to a leader by mobilizing others and inspiring them to follow the path that he or she has laid out. Finally, let's not forget that influence can be bidirectional. People at lower levels of an organization can also acquire power, especially the personal sources of power that includes referent power and expert power. If you want to know more about how to build a theoretical framework for your research, I have published a book titled Demystify Theories, a workbook for developing theoretical frameworks of educational leadership research. The link of the book is in the description below.